Hello everybody, and welcome to the most intimate room in my house, the bedroom. If you're anything like me, your nightstands are probably a complete disaster. You've got like 3 or 4 charging cables, a couple of books, a light, possibly some sort of smart home assistant or clock radio, and then there's all the stuff that you can't show on YouTube. Because let's face it, the whole concept of a nightstand wasn't really meant for our modern lives. These lovable wood boxes are a product of a bygone era. But what if there was someone out there who was brave enough to design a set of nightstands for the way that we actually live today? Something that integrates our modern needs into a more coherent design. That's right. Today, we are going to build a badass high-tech pair of nightstands that I think are going to revolutionize the way we think about bedside storage. And if I'm honest, we're probably also going to do a few other high-tech upgrades here in my bedroom along the way. Sound like fun? All right, let's hit the shop. The first challenge I had to overcome on this project was just getting my hands on some 24-inch wide pieces of walnut. I tried calling a number of lumber yards in my area to see if they had any in stock, but for some reason they all just laughed at me when I asked. So I decided to just DIY it. And a good set of parallel clamps will make this job a lot easier because not only do they provide a nice even clamping force, but they'll also give you a perfectly flat surface that you can reference to make sure your newly created panels aren't twisting on you. It took all the clamps I had and a half bottle of glue, but with a little hard work, the exterior shells of our nightstands were starting to take shape. While I waited for the glue to set, I started breaking down a sheet of plywood for what will eventually be the rear panels and the drawers. For reasons that we'll talk about later, I needed to have some ventilation in those rear panels as well as some holes for wire routing. So over on the CNC, I started cutting those out. Now, you might be asking yourself how I knew how big to make those panels and where to locate those cutouts so early in the process. And the answer is that I actually created a pretty detailed 3D model of these nightstands before I ever hit the shop. A little bit of pre-planning like this will give you a huge net savings in terms of total time spent working on a project. So if any of you guys at home want to get started in 3D modeling, I'm going to link some great free resources that I use down in the video description. After a quick sand to touch up the panels post glue up, I was ready to fold those big walnut sheets into some boxes. But I had myself a bit of a problem. My miter saw will not do 24-inch crosscuts, so that meant that I was gonna have to get a little bit creative. The first thing I did was carefully mark out and plan all of my cuts. Because I wanted my grain pattern to quote-unquote waterfall the whole way around the nightstands, I needed to make sure I didn't accidentally mix anything up. With that boring bit of planning taken care of, I broke out my track saw for the second time and cut my big panels into a bunch of smaller sub-panels. Obviously, square cuts won't give you the illusion of a continuous grain pattern though, so next I transitioned over to the table saw and turned all those straight edge cuts into 45-degree bevels. Pro tip, by the way, the blade angle indicator on most table saws isn't worth the plastic it's written on, so for a job like this, it's always a good idea to dial things in using a digital gauge. A cheap one like this won't break the bank and will definitely save you a lot of swearing on your next project. This is a hot take, but personally, I am not a fan of drawer pull hardware, so after I had all of my miters cut, I also chamfered the front edge of each piece. When combined with my drawer fronts, this will create an integrated and seamless pull, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. For now, the last thing I did on the table saw was cut a 1/2-inch channel into every piece that our rear panel will eventually slot into. And with that, all of our pieces were cut and ready for assembly. Or at least that's what I would be saying if we were dealing with a smaller project. But because of the size of these nightstands, I knew these mitered corners were going to be under a fair bit of tension. So in order to reinforce them, I added a series of biscuits to each corner. Not only will these make each joint stronger, but it will also make the assembly process later on a lot easier as well. All right, so at this point, we could start putting these nightstands together. But before we do that, I want to lay a little bit of groundwork for some of the future tech that is going to go in these nightstands. Over on the CNC, I took the top panel for each nightstand and carved a bow tie shaped pocket into it. Then, in a contrasting piece of maple, I carved a piece that would perfectly slot into it. Now obviously, there's no mechanical need for a bow tie here, but they're going to serve as cool aesthetic landmarks. With some glue, a little bit of gentle persuasion, and a quick sand, I had my bow ties inlaid in place and ready for the next step, which was carving another pocket directly underneath the bow ties on the opposite side. As you may have already guessed, what I want to do is put a wireless charger into these holes that we've carved out. But the problem with most wireless chargers is that they have a very small contact area, and getting your phone to line up can be kind of a pain in the ass. So I found a solution. This PCB is connected to not one, not two, but 5 wireless charging coils. So basically, no matter where you place your phone on that bow tie, it is going to get a wireless charging signal. And as an added bonus, this actually does fast wireless charging, so it should charge your phone up pretty quickly. So we just connect it to a power source and then drop it in there like so. But before we permanently attach it in there, I think we should actually take a second and just assemble these cabinets first, which wasn't without its challenges. This next part was probably the hardest part of the whole project, but I've got a tip for you that will make all of your future assemblies a lot easier. When you're working on something like this, where you've got multiple parts, dozens of intersections that all have to align perfectly, and the constant pressure of knowing that your glue is about to set, it pays dividends to do a dry run first. Before I even touched the glue bottle, I assembled both nightstands completely and clamped everything together. This allowed me to figure out the most effective assembly procedure, the location of all my clamps, and importantly, allowed me to pre-size all of my clamps to save time during the actual assembly when I'd be operating under the pressure of a real time limit. So, thanks in large part to that little bit of prep, the assembly of both nightstands went off without a hitch. Whew, all right, so that was a little bit of a challenge to get this all clamped together, but now that it's done, and while we wait for it to dry, we can get started on the drawer fronts, where we're gonna have a little bit of fun. Random offcuts of wood are the bane of my existence. They clutter up the shop, but I can't bring myself to throw them out because, well, it's still good wood. So my solution has always been to just cut them up into smaller pieces. From there, I can glue them back together into larger mosaics. In fact, that's how I made my original nightstands that we're currently replacing. Not only does this create a unique look that I really like, but it also reduces waste and material costs. So, in order to create these drawer fronts, I taped out their approximate shape on the table and began working on my pattern. At first, I was just randomly laying down pieces, but slowly things started to take shape. I'd move pieces around, trim off excess length, and eventually I had something that I really liked. From there, I rolled all the pieces over, laid out a ton of glue, and then clamped it all together. A couple of taps with a hammer put any rogue pieces back in place, and then I did the whole process over again for the second set of drawer fronts. Okay, so while we wait for that stuff to dry, I'd like to do something that will hopefully save my relationship. Okay, maybe that's being a little bit dramatic, but here's the issue. My partner Sophie loves these sheer curtains that we have here in the bedroom, but I don't because they let in a ton of light in the morning when sometimes I might want to sleep in a little bit, and even at night, we have this damn street light directly outside our windows that can keep me up at night. So I would like to install a high-tech pair of blackout blinds so that we can sleep better at night. But obviously you can't have both, right? Well, you kind of can if you have a 3D printer. I created these custom brackets that integrate a set of rod hooks into the mounting system for the smart blinds. So around the time when we usually go to bed, our blinds will automatically lower down, and then in the morning, just before our alarm clock goes off, they'll automatically raise. And then throughout the day, we can just have the sheer blinds in place like we used to. But it also got me thinking, maybe I could do the same with our lighting too. So I installed a set of smart dimmers that will control all of our lights on a similar schedule. And as an added bonus, I won't have to get out of bed to turn off any lights that I accidentally left on. In fact, I've got pretty much every light in my house wired up like that for exactly that reason. So with all that smart home tech, how exactly am I going to control it all? Well, I've got a plan for that. But first, I think we should head back to the shop and finish those nightstands. Obviously, with our clamps off, the drawer fronts were still far from done. So the first thing I did was trim off their rough edges. Then I divided them in half because I wasn't just gonna have one massive drawer for both nightstands. A couple of passes through the drum sander flattened them out, and then to finish off a thread from earlier in the video, I cut a chamfer on each of the outside faces. When you combine this with a matching chamfer on the leading edge of the cabinet, what you end up with is one long integrated drawer pull that wraps the whole way around the cabinet for a nice clean look that's also very convenient to use. So now that we have the boxes done and the drawer fronts done, we're pretty much done with making stuff, except for obviously the drawers that still have to go in here. But before we get onto those, we have to do what I think is probably going to be the worst part of this project. Luckily for you guys at home, we can use a little bit of movie magic to skip the sanding step and head right into finishing, where things get a little bit more interesting. All right, so we are now ready to start applying the finish. And when it comes to highware furniture like nightstands, I always prefer to use an oil modified polyurethane finish as opposed to some of the more popular oil rub finishes and hard wax oils like the Rubio Monaco. And I will tell you why as I apply the finish in a voiceover. So here's the thing that every YouTuber conveniently leaves out about those other finishes. You're basically locked into using a coaster for the rest of your life. Any drinking glasses will leave rings, and in general, they just aren't that durable. Personally, I'm more of a set it and forget it type of guy, and I've never found another finish that rivals polyurethane in terms of durability and resilience. Plus, I just really enjoy a nice cold glass of water before bed. But you know what I don't enjoy before bed? Vacuuming. So let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Narwal, and their brand new Freo X Ultra robot vacuum and mop. I have had a lot of smart home tech over the years, but robot vacuums are far and away the most useful. And the Freo X Ultra is the best that I have ever seen. With an industry-leading 8,200 pascals of suction, it can easily suck up dirt and debris off of any flooring surface. And if you have a little furry friend like I do, well then you're really going to appreciate their zero tangle floating brush system. Did I mention that it's a mop too? Down here you have these dual triangular scrubbers that apply 12 newtons of downward force as they rotate. And to make sure that your carpets always stay dry, they'll automatically retract when necessary. Then, back in the base station, those scrubbers get cleaned and dried after every single wash so that they're always ready to go, and you never have to worry about any weird smells. It actually knows how clean the scrubbers are by analyzing the water coming off of them. If the water isn't clean enough, then it'll go back out and remop until it is. Now, if that isn't advanced enough for you, the Freo X Ultra will automatically map your entire home so that it can plot the most efficient route possible. It even has a tri-laser obstacle avoidance system that prevents it from accidentally sucking up your phone's charger or your cat's favorite toy. What it all boils down to is that this machine is a great way to keep your home looking fresh without you really having to do much of anything. If you want more information about the Narwal Freo X Ultra, check out the links down in the video description. And without further ado, let's get back to building these nightstands, which will eventually control the Narwal Freo X Ultra. Back in the shop, it was time to move on to an admittedly low-tech, but highly functional part of this build. That's right, we're talking about storage. And even though humans have been making drawers for centuries now, that doesn't mean that there haven't been some recent innovations in the space, as we'll explore in a second. First though, I had to make the boxes. I rolled on a couple of coats of finish before assembly because it's a lot easier to do it that way, and then started gluing and nailing everything together. I cut all of my pieces so they'd interlock, and I didn't cheap out and use 1/4-inch plywood for the drawer bottoms, so everything fit together nicely and felt really solid. The last step was some iron-on edge banding to cover up those raw plywood edges. Oh, and one last coat of finish to blend everything together. Okay, so now that we have our drawers all done, we are ready to move on to the next stage. And if I'm being perfectly honest with you guys, I'm a little bit nervous about this part because, well, I've never done it before. If you look down here, you will see on the side of this drawer a conventional drawer slide. This is a simple piece of hardware that allows the drawer to slide in and out, but it's got a couple of problems. The first being that, well, you just get this ugly metal strip on the side of your drawer. And the second, and probably bigger problem, is that it doesn't have any adjustment to it. Enter the new kid on the block. These are undermount drawer slides. And because they go on the bottom of the drawer, as the name might imply, they are basically invisible when in operation, and they give you 3 axes of adjustment on your drawers after you've already installed them. The downside is that I think the installation is a little bit more complex, so let's get into it. The first thing I did was cut some notches in the back of each drawer. A more experienced installer would have done these earlier in the process, but hey, like I said, it's my first time. I also had to drill a set of holes that allow the slides to hook into the drawers and keep them from lifting up during operation. Then I installed these special mounting plates that make these slides so much more functional than conventional slides. Like I said a second ago, each one of these has 3 axes of adjustment that we'll explore in a second. When it came to installing the slides themselves in the nightstands, it was pretty straightforward. A set of spacer blocks made it nice and easy to get them at a consistent height, and then they just screwed in place. With all of that done, there was nothing left to do but install the drawers and test them out. This drawer goes in there, that goes in there. Beauty, look at that. Nice soft close. Love it when a plan comes together. Finally, it was time to install the drawer fronts. And if you've ever done this before, you know that it can be a really frustrating process. Thankfully, I've got a little trick to show you that will make it a lot easier. Just use a little bit of double-sided tape to help position your drawer fronts. If they don't look quite right, you can pull them off and try again. Then, once everything looks copacetic, you can permanently fix the fronts in place. But let's say you still end up with a slight alignment issue. Well, now you can use those adjustments on the drawer slides to dial things in until it's absolutely perfect. And if something ever shifts or moves after years of use, you can always go back and readjust them to keep everything looking good. So there we go. After a little bit of adjustment, our drawer fronts are on there perfectly straight. Our poles work really well. And I think that's basically it for the construction of these cabinets. So now the next thing we need to do is start cramming some tech in here. My high-powered wireless chargers went in first. I used a healthy helping of hot glue to temporarily hold them down. And then I made these custom 3D printed covers to permanently fix them in place and to cover their bare PCBs. Over on the back side of the cabinet, I used my favorite keyhole mounting trick to install a set of 4-port surge protectors. These allow all the electronic gizmos inside of the nightstands to be plugged into a single discrete source and will keep my bedroom looking as wire-free as possible. And then for charging phones and other mobile devices, I installed a 45-watt USB charging hub on one of the nightstands. And then on the other one, I've got something a little bit more overkill planned. This last item doesn't really count as tech, but I also screwed in a set of felt pads so that I can easily slide my nightstands around without worrying about scratching my floors. And then it was time to dig into lighting. So you remember earlier how I had those lamps on my nightstand? Well, to tell you the truth, I'm not the biggest fan because they take up a lot of space relative to how much light they give off. And also because it's a single bright source of light, the light ends up being really harsh. So what if I told you there was a way that we could fix both of those issues while simultaneously exploring some new LED technology? These are flexible cob LED strips, and the cool thing about them is that they don't look like traditional strip lights. They have so many individual LEDs on them that they appear as if they're just a single flexible tube of light, which means the light that they produce is a lot softer and you don't have to hide them in a diffusion channel. They can also do full RGB adjustment and dial in different color temperatures of white light. Unfortunately, this was going to be a bit of a tricky setup. If you've ever installed LED strips before, you know that 90-degree bends are near impossible. And my plan was to install these lights as a ring around the backside of the cabinet. So that meant I had to make custom connectors for every corner. It took a lot of cutting and a lot of crimping, but eventually I was ready to connect my strips back to these controller boxes. Later, these will connect to my smart home network and enable some fun integrations, but for now I was just looking to test that I wired everything up correctly. Okay, big moment of truth. Let's plug this guy in. Let's see if it works. That's our 24-volt power supply. Connect it here. Yes. Turns out I do know how to crimp a wire. Now, one thing I want to check with these lights is whether or not they strobe under a high-speed camera, because I'm a little bit of a weirdo and that type of thing is important to me. Oh yes, no strobing. Love to see that. All right, let's get them installed inside the cabinets. Buoyed by that big win, I started peeling and sticking. Slowly, I worked my way around the perimeter, and then I went inside the cabinet where I had the last minute idea of extending the strips so that I could illuminate the inside of the cabinets to help find things at night. To keep things clean and organized, I installed the controllers where no one will ever see them and hooked everything up to power. And I think the final results look pretty damn good. I also decided to reinforce each intersection with these screw-on clips because, let's face it, we all know that the adhesives on these strips isn't gonna last more than a couple of days on its own. At this point, I noticed I still had quite a bit of LED strip left, and because I hate waste, I devised what I think is a pretty clever use for the leftover material. I chained them together into this big U-shaped section, and then back at home, I installed it on the back side of my bed frame. When combined with the lights of the nightstands, these will illuminate the entire wall in a soft reflected light that's perfect for reading, or just setting the mood if you know what I mean. Finally, it was time to bring in the new nightstands, and here you can see just how much clutter they're gonna end up hiding. That's a lot of cables, so let's talk about charging. Oh, yeah. So for Sophie's nightstand, I installed a pretty run-of-the-mill USB charging hub, but for my nightstand, I wanted to get a bit overkill. This is Ugreen's 200-watt desktop charger, and this is capable of fast charging my phone, my laptop, my Nintendo Switch, and my ROG Ally, all at the same time. So that will turn this nightstand into the primary charging hub for all of my mobile devices. Installation was admittedly a bit low tech, but I have found this really heavy duty double-sided tape that works great for applications like this. With all that taken care of, I pushed the new nightstands into position, tested to make sure everything was working, and then loaded them up with all of my daily drivers. Oh man, so that is a lot of tech. And like I said earlier, we are going to need a way to control it all. So I went out and I bought this, the Google Pixel tablet. And as far as tablets go, it's actually pretty mid. It's not gonna win any awards for world's greatest tablet. However, it does have a couple of features that I think are going to be really, really useful in this use case. The first is this base station. Not only does it charge the tablet and give it some additional speakers, but it also transforms it into a Google Home hub. So from this screen, I can control not just my bedroom, but my entire house. I can raise and lower the blinds, turn on fans, check my security cameras, and of course, I can control all of the lights that I just set up. I can even tell the Narwal to start vacuuming and mopping if I want to. And the other cool thing about the Pixel tablet is that relative to its cost, you actually get a really powerful CPU with it. Enough that you can play some Android games as well as a whole suite of retro emulators. So this thing will kind of be like my game console away from home. I think I'll just keep a little Bluetooth controller like this right here in the nightstand table. And then, you know, if I want to, I can game before bed. So those are my smart nightstands. And while I am extremely thrilled with how those turned out, that doesn't mean that they still couldn't be better. So let's talk post-mortem analysis. The first thing I could have done better on this build is really due to my own cheapness and the ridiculous price of hardwood these days. From certain angles, you can see inside the drawers, and I could have fixed this by thickening the side walls and creating a more sophisticated front reveal profile, but that probably would have cost me like an extra $500 in wood alone. Second, LED placement. As you can see, I placed the LED strips very close to the outside edges, and that leads to the sharp cutoffs in the light spill. I don't actually hate this, as it creates a pretty unique look, but it's not what I intended to create. So an easy fix for this would be to just take the LED light strips and move them a bit closer towards the middle. That gives you a much softer light spill. And then finally, the brightness of the LEDs. They just aren't as bright as I was expecting. Well, they're fine for ambiance and even a little bit of night reading. If I wanted something powerful enough to illuminate the whole area around the bed, I probably should have doubled up the strips around the perimeter or laid them out in a grid that covered the entire back of the cabinet. If you're looking for a similar high-tech furniture build, you might want to check out my entertainment coffee table project. And on that note, I'm done, and I will see you guys in the next video. See you.